On June 4, 1943, at Camp Hearn in Texas, the spoon shook in the grip of Unteroffizier Wilhelm Hoffman as he gazed at the unbelievable spread in front of him. There was beef stew featuring genuine pieces of meat bigger than his full weekly allowance back in the Afrika Korps, crisp vegetables free of decay, loaves of white bread made with real wheat rather than sawdust, and next to it, a tumbler of icy milk that appeared to shimmer under the Texas midday light. "This can't possibly be genuine," he scribbled in a note that arrived at his mother's home in the devastated city of Hamburg after 6 months. "They're displaying propaganda rations for us. Come tomorrow, we'll be back to turnip broth like the rest." Surrounding him, 150 German POWs from Rommel's shattered Afrika Korps lingered in stunned silence within the dining facility, erected in a mere 90 days. These troops, who had endured on just 200 grams of bread laced with sawdust and thin soup derived from fodder beets, now confronted servings that could have sustained a whole Wehrmacht platoon for 3 days. The tinkling of utensils against tin plates had fallen quiet. Tears streamed down some faces, while others remained motionless, struggling to square the plenty on display with 3 years of Nazi tales depicting a famished, crumbling United States. What escaped these fighters' grasp was that they were beholding the farming and manufacturing prowess of a country generating surplus food beyond its own needs, all while nourishing 12 million troops in service and dispatching 17 million tons of provisions to its partners. The shift sparked by this initial repast would eventually shatter every notion they clung to regarding U.S. frailty, Teutonic dominance, and the destined victory of the Third Reich. Grasping the mental toll of U.S. plenty requires first delving into the severe scarcity these warriors had escaped. By 1943, Germany's allotment framework had devolved into an intricate ladder of privation. Ordinary citizens might get 700 calories per day if fortune smiled. Frontline troops were pledged 3,600 calories, though they seldom saw even half. In North Africa, where the bulk of the initial POWs fell, conditions had turned dire. Feldwebel Vera Müller, taken with the 21st Panzer Division in Tunisia, maintained a journal that endured in his kin's care. His final notation prior to apprehension stated May 11, 1943. Today's divisional fare, 150 grams of dark bread, largely sawdust, 15 grams of rancid margarine, soup from a single spud and desert scrub. The Italians possess zilch. We're devouring our mounts. The Afrika Korps, once the Wehrmacht's jewel, had withered to gaunt apparitions by capitulation. Rommel himself had lodged frequent protests with Berlin over the untenable logistics. Convoys bearing provisions sank under fire from Allied planes and subs. Whatever reached shore often spoiled in the swelter. Come early 1943, Wehrmacht personnel in North Africa battled scurvy, beriberi, and protein starvation ailments unseen by medics since the Great War. Oberleutnant Friedrich Bauer, a physician seized at Kasserine Pass, recorded the decline. Troops' gums oozed blood non-stop from scurvy. Vitamin A shortages caused night blindness in 30% of the ranks. Protein famine induced edema, ballooning their limbs. We'd morphed into a force of ambulatory cadavers. The yield at Tunisia on May 13, 1943, delivered 275,000 Axis captives into Allied hands. Included were Germany's top-tier forces, battle-hardened victors of France, pushers of Brits to El Alamein, and firm believers in Aryan supremacy alongside Yankee moral rot. The initial jolt hit right away at the provisional holding areas in North Africa. U.S. supply officers handed out C rations and K rations to the detainees. These field packs, which GIs griped about endlessly, struck the Germans as heavenly bounty. Unteroffizier Karl Schmidt, nabbed with the 90th Light Division, noted, "Yanks passed us compact parcels labeled K rations. Within lay more edibles than I'd glimpsed in 2 months. Crackers sans mold, a can of true meat, chocolate bars, sugar, cigarettes too." They expressed regret that this was their best offering. Expressed regret. The voyage stateside on Liberty ships unveiled the next epiphany. These hulls poured from U.S. yards at a tempo German sea captains would deem fantastical if sighted ferrying goods to the continent. Instead of voyaging home void, they ferried living freight. In the bowels, swiftly adapted for POW carriage, German captives met American excess in its everyday guise. Gefreiter Hans Huber recalled how U.S. mariners discarded post-meal scraps exceeding what my whole unit consumed weekly. Untouched white bread loaves vanished into bins. Crewmen moaned over frequent poultry servings. One stomped a softened candy bar flat. We scrapped among ourselves to rummage their refuse. Norfolk Naval Base, Virginia, August 4th. Upon their arrival at the docks, the captives faced a sight that upended everything they thought they knew about the war. Laborers at the piers, including numerous women and African Americans whom Nazi doctrine had dismissed as unfit for complex work, were offloading cargo from vessels while munching on hearty sandwiches loaded with beef and dairy. They sipped Coca-Cola casually, tossing the empty bottles into receptacles without a second glance. Cigarettes dangled from their lips non-stop, often crushed out before they were fully smoked. During intake procedures, every detainee underwent a health check that featured an astonishing element: nutritional pills to combat their dietary shortfalls. Captured German physicians, acting as inmates themselves, collaborated with U.S. medics who handled cases of undernourishment that evoked images of camp survivors far more than faux combatants. At Norfolk, Major William Patterson, an Army doctor, documented, "These Germans showed up profoundly underfed. Their typical body weight lagged 30 pounds behind the standard. Conditions like scurvy, pellagra, beriberi, starvation ailments we'd only encountered in medical books. Right away, we started a stepped-up nutrition plan to avoid refeeding complications." The rail trip inland to detention sites offered a 3-day dive into U.S. farming plenty. As the cars chugged along Virginia's Shenandoah Valley, the men crowded the panes, staring at vast apple-laden groves without end, corn expanses reaching the skyline, and pastures brimming with plump livestock. Each village boasted stocked markets with overflowing displays, eateries posting fresh meal deals, and sundries shops drawing crowds for frozen treats. In time, the U.S. POW network would accommodate 425,000 Germans, peaking at 371,683 in May 1945. Spread over 700 sites in 46 states, the setup placed roughly 50,000 in Texas alone, across various spots that leveraged the region's weather, matching the Geneva Convention's call for conditions akin to capture zones. One early facility, Camp Hearn in Texas for North African Front captives, rose in merely 4 months and housed up to 4,800 POWs. It boasted comforts beyond what many Germans had enjoyed back home: powered illumination, heated showers, sanitary plumbing, leisure areas, and dining rooms dishing out 3 warm courses each day. Records from the inaugural complete menu on June 5, 1943, endure. Morning fare: porridge with dairy and sweetener, fluffy eggs, strips of pork, bread slathered in spread and preserves, brew with additives, citrus drink. Midday: broth with veggies, baked swine and sauce, whipped spuds, root vegetables, rolls with butter, fruit pastry, dairy. Evening: crispy fowl, grains, pods, cornmeal baked good, mixed fruits, brew. That one meal clocked in at about 3,500 calories, surpassing 2 days' allotment for ordinary Germans. The protein content alone topped a month's civilian quota. POW chronicler Hermann Richa, once a Russian factory hand, noted, "I gorged myself to discomfort, then kept going. Everyone followed suit. A few stashed loaves under their cots, convinced the plenty couldn't last. U.S. sentries chuckled and assured us it'd repeat the next day and beyond. We remained skeptical." The sheer volume of provisions in these U.S. sites eroded Nazi beliefs more effectively than any leaflet campaign. Indoctrinated to view America as frail, fractured, and crumbling, these troops instead found themselves nourished superior to Wehrmacht brass, even as the nation battled on dual fronts. Post-exchange outlets opened a glimpse into Yankee buying habits. Using their 80 cents per day from jobs, inmates snapped up goods long absent in the homeland: candy slabs, smokes, shaving tools, cleansers, dentifrice, stationery, and remarkably frozen confections. Weekly at Camp Hearn's shop, 5,000 such treats flew off shelves to Germans who hadn't savored one since pre-war times. Correspondent Fritz Muller penned to his spouse, "The other day I got ice cream. Actual ice cream. Back home, even elite members can't obtain it, yet here foes grab it for a nickel. The Yanks have cocoa in such excess they dole it out to detainees. Recovery diets. For the underfed showcased U.S. healthcare surplus, detainees got vitamin shots, additive boosters, and tailored rations against shortfall illnesses. On-site clinics stocked more gear than typical German frontline units. Penicillin, that wonder remedy Germany couldn't manufacture, flowed generously for detainee ailments. Captive Wehrmacht physician, Dr. Heinrich Schmidt observed, they handed out vitamin flasks and countless tablets, treating them like sweets. At home, our injured went without. Here, foes got superior treatment than our own folk could imagine. Come October 1943, workforce gaps prompted POWs to toil on U.S. fields and in packing plants. Such contact with American farming. The ideological unraveling of German prisoners through exposure to American cultural and industrial food systems reached its climax. Outside Houston at a cotton gin, inmates marveled at automated harvesting that seemed beyond belief. One machine accomplished the labor of 50 workers. The facility handled more cotton daily than entire German textile factories managed in a month. Yet it was the effortless plenty that left them reeling. Farmhands, among them African-American toilers deemed inferior by Nazi doctrine, enjoyed midday meals that rivaled banquets back home. Hearty sandwiches packed with beef or ham, intact apples, wedges of pie, and thermoses brimming with coffee laced with genuine cream. They discarded half-consumed portions without a second thought. Prisoner Johann Kellner, laboring on a farm close to Jackson, Mississippi, observed, "The Negro workers eat meat every day. White bread, fruit. One threw away a whole apple because it had a small bruise. In Germany, people would fight over that apple." At a Del Monte facility in California, captives observed rail cars brimming with peaches transformed into canned goods via techniques unknown in Germany. The operation churned through more produce in one day than the Reich imported annually. Employees sipped orange juice as if it were commonplace. Flawed fruit, prized as a rarity in Germany, was jettisoned in massive quantities. Nothing astonished the German POWs quite like the scale of U.S. meat intake. Back home, civilians scraped by on 250 grams of meat per week if it appeared at all. Troops were allotted 150 grams daily in theory, though shortages made it a fantasy. In U.S. POW facilities, inmates savored meat 2 or 3 times each day. The superior grade impressed them as much as the volume. No horse meat or dubious tinned products masquerading as protein, but identifiable portions of beef, pork, and chicken. At its height, Camp Shelby in Mississippi accommodated 5,300 German POWs and consumed 14,000 pounds of meat weekly. The on-site butchery sliced steaks, minced burger, and readied roasts with an offhand ease that bordered on the profane to those who had watched loved ones waste away from hunger. Scribe Paul Fisher noted, "Today for Sunday dinner, we had roast beef, a slab as thick as my thumb. The Americans complained it was tough. In Germany, this would be wedding feast meat. My children have never seen such meat." Those assigned to Swift & Company's slaughterhouse in Fort Worth beheld the vastness of American beef output firsthand. The site handled 1,000 head of cattle each day. Staff carried off bundles of meat that could command a month's pay for a German worker. The extravagance was staggering, penned assistant Kurt Zimmerman. They tossed out cuts deemed overly fatty, items that would have been delicacies in Germany. A single operation yielded more meat weekly than Bavaria obtained yearly. For years, German POWs had endured on canned veggies, sauerkraut, pickled beets, and desiccated beans. Fresh produce had faded into legend, reserved for Nazi brass alone. In American enclosures, crisp vegetables and fruits arrived fresh every day. The mental jolt from oranges at morning meals was profound. Citrus fruits, exotic even in Texas summers, handed out routinely to foe captives. Supplies included steady deliveries of apples, peaches, pears, grapes, and bananas, items most Germans hadn't glimpsed since the conflict's outset. Captive Wilhelm Becker recorded, "They gave us oranges at breakfast, not special occasions, every day if we wanted. The vitamin C cured my bleeding gums in a week. We ate more fruit as prisoners than German children see in a year." The array of greens felt boundless. Lettuce, tomatoes, corn, beans, peas, carrots, potatoes, onions, cabbage, squash, all vibrant and unprocessed. At Camp Hearn, a 50-acre plot tilled by POWs yielded harvests that astounded them with the fertility of U.S. land and techniques. On rural assignments, inmates confronted farming wealth that upended their notions of feasibility. In California's Central Valley, where some were relocated for harvest duties, they gathered yields from endless groves. They recoiled as sound fruit got culled for slight flaws or plowed under to prop up markets. In Germany, true chocolate vanished by 1941, supplanted by ersatz versions from scorched acorns and beet syrup. Authentic bars were scarcer than jewels. Sugar allotments capped at 200 grams monthly for ordinary folk. Within U.S. POW sites, confections like chocolate were routine treats. The base commissary stocked Hershey bars, Baby Ruth, Snickers, Milky Way, icons that loomed large for repatriated prisoners. The emotional weight of such everyday luxuries was immense. Correspondent Kurt Wagner reflected, "I bought 5 chocolate bars with one day's wages. In Germany, all the money in the world cannot buy one real chocolate bar. What kind of wealth allows enemies to buy chocolate daily?" Facility cooks whipped up sweets around the clock. Pies, cakes, cookies, puddings. Sugar flowed freely into brews, flakes, and pastries. The inmates, plagued by prolonged sweet shortages. At first, they made themselves ill from indulging in sugary treats. Dairy items like milk, butter, cheese, and cream, which had all but vanished from everyday German meals, showed up in plentiful supply at the American POW facilities. Fresh milk accompanied every meal. Butter spread on bread, along with cheese sandwiches and ice cream, helped boost the inmates' health quickly through the vital calcium and proteins in those products. Back in Germany, milk was typically saved for young kids and expectant mothers if it could be found at all. Butter traded hands on the black market, while cheese felt like a relic from another era. At Camp Hearn, the dairy supplier brought in 500 gallons of milk each day. Detainees who hadn't savored fresh milk for years sipped it as if it were a cure-all. Unterseher Franz Waber noted, "Today, I downed a whole glass of chilled milk. Genuine milk, not the powdered or condensed kind. It evoked peace, my early years, all the things we'd forfeited." By 1943, German coffee consisted of toasted barley, acorns, or chicory, harsh stand-ins that hardly evoked the real thing. In the U.S. POW camps, authentic coffee poured freely like tap water. For a society that had long viewed coffee as a cornerstone of daily gatherings, the endless supply packed a profound mental punch. The aroma of percolating coffee in the mornings, the effortless top-ups during meals, the option to add genuine cream and sugar, these modest indulgences shattered Nazi myths. Hedman Friedrich Timman observed, "Americans sip coffee throughout the day, proper Brazilian beans with cream and sugar. In Germany, my mother ekes out 50 grams of Uz." Potatoes, a basic element of the German menu, turned into yet another example of U.S. plenty. By 1943, German loaves were dense, shadowy blends of rye, potato starch, and sawdust, limited to 2,000 grams per week for those in physical jobs. They frequently arrived spoiled with mold. At American POW sites, crisp white bread graced each sitting. The bakery at Camp Shelby churned out 10,000 loaves every week, plush white wheat varieties that Germans linked to extravagance. Inmates could consume as much as they desired. Grider Paul Schmidt remarked, "White bread as tender as pastry, baked fresh daily. We grab however many pieces we like. In Germany, folks get murdered for nicking bread." When inmates got permission to correspond with loved ones, their missives carried harsh realities that censors in Germany found tough to bury. How could they describe to relatives scraping by on beet soup that, as captives, they enjoyed meat thrice daily? At first, many fabricated details in their notes, reluctant to weigh down their famished kin with the facts. Some forwarded all their pay home to snag provisions via the underground trade, aware that a month's salary could secure goods beyond what coupons allowed. Unterpitia Karl Hoffmann's note to his spouse, snagged by German overseers, stated, "Dearest Greta, I'm eating heartily here. Don't fret over me. The Americans possess food in excess of their needs. Now I grasp their reason for battling. They're safeguarding utopia." What left German POWs even more astonished than the sheer volume was the U.S. adaptability in addressing nutritional requirements. Those with health issues got tailored menus, diabetics received no-sugar options, ulcer sufferers had mild, soothing fare. Such personalized attention for foes outstripped what German facilities offered their own casualties. The Americans went further by sourcing familiar items like rye flour for hearty loaves, sauerkraut, and additional Teutonic favorites. This regard for personal tastes clashed sharply with Nazi uniformity. Dr. Wilhelm Braun, the top German doctor at Camp Shelby, commented, "The U.S. invests greater resources in suiting enemy detainees' eating preferences than the Reich does in nourishing its troops." As greater numbers of POWs labored on U.S. farmlands, they gained insights into farming efficiency that would transform Germany's recovery after the war. They picked up knowledge on rotating crops, synthetic nutrients, machine-driven operations, and watering systems. They witnessed outputs that German fields couldn't match, even during calm periods. On a Kansas wheat operation, author Oberg Hermann Weber learned that one equipped U.S. grower could manage 640 acres, territory that would demand a full Bavarian hamlet. The mechanical reaper handled 100 acres of grain per day. The farmer I assisted generated more produce than my whole Bavarian region. Weber added, "He achieved it using equipment, compounds, and techniques unknown to us." On November 25, 1943, yet another mental jolt arrived with Thanksgiving supper. The captives lacked background on this U.S. tradition, yet they recognized plenty on sight. That evening at Camp Hearn featured roasted turkey with dressing, mashed potatoes slathered in gravy, candied yams topped with marshmallows, green bean bake, cranberry relish, buttered rolls, pumpkin and apple desserts, coffee and milk. Every inmate got servings sufficient for a German household over 7 days. The turkey portion alone surpassed a month's meat allotment in Germany. Feldwebel Kurt Zimmermann recorded one German POW marveled, "The Yanks marked a holiday by treating captured foes like royalty." If every U.S. household shared that feast, then America isn't a nation, it's heaven. Those held in U.S. canneries saw massive-scale food canning that outpaced anything in their homeland. At the Campbell Soup Plant in Camden, New Jersey, inmates observed the facility churning out 10 million soup tins each year. Non-stop conveyor belts packed containers with proteins and produce unavailable to German operations. The machinery left them in awe. Robotic peelers, non-stop boilers, airtight sealers. Yet the inspection process stunned them even more. Slightly bent tins got tossed aside. The discards from flawed items surpassed all of Germany's food output. Lieutenant Fritz Müller noted, "They scrapped entire loads of preserves because the stickers were marginally misaligned. Flawless edibles thrown out over mere appearances." Ice cream stood as the pinnacle of Yankee extravagance. Back home, it had been a scarce treat before the conflict, unattainable amid shortages. But in U.S. POW sites, it was everyday fare. At Camp Shelby, a device whipped up 50 gallons per day in warm months. Detainees purchased frozen treats, waffle cones, and dishes from the commissary. Knowing adversaries got such delights while their own kids never sampled them hit like an emotional gut punch. POW chronicler Hunts Meir reflected, "I savored vanilla today. In the fatherland, even the elite couldn't dream of it. Yet here, we captives snag it for pennies." U.S. doctors tracked the inmates' recovery from decent rations with precision. Just 3 months in, the typical captive packed on 25 to 30 pounds. Scurvy vanished, vision issues at dusk cleared up. Swelling from lack of protein faded. At Camp Shelby, lead physician Major Robert Harrison stated, "These Teutons showed up like skeletal survivors from camps, wasted, ill, minds clouded by hunger. Proper feeding for 3 months turned them into vigorous youths." The men themselves struggled to accept their bodily changes. Strength reemerged, vitality surged, the haze of deprivation dispersed. Gazing into glass, they recognized their pre-war selves, with vitality restored and stomachs satisfied. Guilt often overwhelmed many detainees about their loved ones' hardships. How could they relish daily repasts when their offspring went hungry? Admitting that foes nourished them superior to how their own regime sustained civilians proved too agonizing to confess. A smuggled note from POW Paul Fisher to his spouse, unearthed post-war, confessed, "Darling, I dare not reveal the reality. Meat graces my plate daily as you go without. I'm secure while bombs fall on you. The Yanks care for me more than our leaders do for you." The 1943 holiday season brought further mental strain. U.S. congregations, town groups, and the Red Cross shipped 500,000 gift boxes to German captives. Inside each, sweets, biscuits, preserves, smokes, and sundries. Nearby, folks tossed in crafts like woven neckwear, sketched greetings, pastries from parish bakers. Distribution ignored status or ideology. Such impartial kindness from those whose kin battled and perished overseas demolished the final shreds of Nazi superiority myths. Correspondent Vera Kleen observed, "Folks whose boys we aim to slay recently gifted us Yuletide parcels. Faith groups invoked blessings on us. Youngsters mailed greetings for joyful holidays. Only victors brimming with confidence extend mercy to foes like this." By spring 1944, rations in U.S. camps unwittingly formed a curriculum. Detainees absorbed lessons on sustenance, nutrients, even meals and hygiene. They realized sufficient eating boosted not only well-being, but output, spirits, and sharpness. Camp reading rooms held U.S. farm magazines and recipe guides. Inmates pored over Yankee cultivation techniques, preservation methods, and diet knowledge. They grasped that the state's bounty stemmed from deliberate advances: lab-tested earth, superior seeds, chemical boosts for harvests, streamlined supply chains. Ex-AG student and Oberleutnant Friedrich Becker penned, "Yanks have made agriculture a discipline. They analyze dirt, cultivate enhanced plants, deploy science for bigger crops. Small wonder they overflow with provisions." As 1944 wore on and dispatches from home darkened, the gap between Camp Plenty and homeland famine grew intolerable. Smuggled missives described urban ruins, folks slurping weed broth, youngsters perishing from deficiencies. In contrast, U.S.-held Germans griped over menu monotony. Nazism's ethical core eroded before Yankee surplus. How could the supposed elite wither while lessers squandered eats? The NE, even the GIs tasked with hauling away trash, managed to eat better than officers back in Germany. That ideology had been thoroughly crushed by harsh facts on the ground. The summer of 1944 delivered new eye-openers as captives labored amid the height of U.S. farming output. They gathered peaches in Georgia, gathered veggies in New Jersey, and toiled in Kansas wheat expanses. The massive scale of crop yields left them reeling. During one day at a Georgia peach grove, the detainees collected enough fruit to sustain a whole German town for an entire month. Flawless peaches got categorized by dimensions and condition. Produce with minor flaws headed to canning facilities. Bruised items ended up tossed or given to livestock. Sergeant Wilhelm Hoffman noted, "We fed peaches to pigs today. Thousands of peaches too ripe for shipping given to swine." In Germany, people would weep for such fruit. An event at Camp Shelby in July 1944 highlighted the mental toll of U.S. plenty. Nearby farmers contributed truckloads of watermelons for a 4th of July event. The German POWs had never encountered watermelons before. This unusual produce simply wasn't available in Germany. The captives received full watermelons to divide among themselves. Plenty of them had no clue how to consume it. Several detainees shed tears over the sugary richness, the lavish supply of simple sugar and moisture packed into fruit. Unteroffizier Karl Schmidt observed, "They gave us giant green fruits full of sweet red flesh. Each one could feed a family. The Americans ate the centers and threw away the rest." A country capable of squandering food as mere fun had secured victory long ago. Laboring in Iowa's cornfields delivered yet another farming jolt. Iowa by itself generated more corn than Germany's total grain harvest across the nation. Yet the most astonishing part, most of it fueled livestock rather than people. The idea of cultivating crops solely to nourish animals for eventual meat struck them as an extravagance Germany could never imagine. In the U.S., top-tier farmland went toward animal fodder, showcasing a degree of farm surplus that bordered on the unbelievable. Feldwebel Hermann Fischer recorded, "The farmer explained that corn was mainly for pigs and cattle, They grow food to feed to animals to make meat. The Americans have so much grain they can afford to convert it to meat. Inside a sugar beet facility in Colorado, German POWs observed sugar refining that challenged credibility. Back home, sugar scarcity hit hard, with ordinary folks allotted just 200 grams per month. The Colorado operation handled 5,000 tons of sugar beets each day, yielding heaps of refined white sugar. Plant employees took home 5-pound bags of sugar as part of their wages. They sprinkled it freely into coffee, over breakfast grains, and in baked goods. The everyday indulgence in refined sugar by regular laborers offered yet another crushing contrast. Oberleutnant Paul Uber commented, "I watched a worker pour half a cup of sugar into his coffee. This was 2 months of German sugar rations dissolved into 1 cup of coffee." German POWs stationed at Gulf Coast docks saw American fishing operations haul in hauls that overshadowed Germany's entire seafood sector. Shrimp vessels offloaded heaps of unintended catches, perfectly good fish discarded simply because they weren't the desired variety. In Galveston, the prisoners observed shrimpers discarding more fish in a single day than German fleets managed in a week. The notion of wasting edible food for not matching the ideal type was beyond understanding. Sergeant Hans Muller jotted down, "They threw tons of fish back into the sea because they were the wrong kind. In Germany, people would fight over fish heads." On Wisconsin dairy operations, German POWs faced milk yields that appeared surreal. Individual farms churned out more milk per day than complete German regions. The equipment, automatic milkers, chilled storage vats, pasteurizing gear, lagged years behind what they knew in Germany. The greatest surprise lay in the nonchalant discarding. Milk slightly past peak freshness got poured out. Cream got skimmed off for generous use. Butter production reached volumes sufficient to provision German urban areas. Unteroffizier Fritz Wagner wrote, "The farm where I work produces 1,000 gallons of milk daily. One farm. They pour excess milk on fields as fertilizer." At an egg operation in Maryland, the detainees discovered mass-scale egg farming alien to their experiences. The site kept 50,000 hens, yielding 40,000 eggs every day. Machines handled gathering, cleaning, and grading the eggs. In Germany, civilians might snag 1 egg weekly via coupons, if lucky. U.S. POWs enjoyed eggs every morning at meals. The Maryland facility dispatched rail cars brimming with eggs to urban centers. Sergeant Wilhelm Becker remarked, "Each house held more birds than our entire village. They threw away more cracked eggs daily than Germany produces." The Thanksgiving feast of 1944 outdid the prior years in extravagance, even as America battled across 2 theaters. The spread for German POWs hadn't shrunk. In fact, it expanded. Turkey, ham, roast beef, mashed potatoes, sweet potatoes, stuffing, gravy, green beans, corn, cranberry sauce, 3 kinds of pie, ice cream, coffee, milk, and wine. The prisoners remained in awed quiet. Their homeland was star destruction everywhere, urban areas in ruins, kids surviving on broth made from weeds. Still, the United States supplied German captives with banquets, surpassing the lavish spreads of Germany's pre-conflict holidays. Hedman Vera Mueller observed, "The Americans possess such vast quantities of provisions that they nourish their foes more lavishly than we sustained our own people during times of tranquility. They subdued us through sustenance long before their troops set foot here." Toward the end of 1944, numerous detainees ceased documenting their meals in letters to loved ones. The remorse proved too heavy to bear. Concealed journals and clandestine correspondences discovered post-war exposed the mental anguish of plenty in the face of loved ones' famine. Feldable Otto Schmidt's hidden note stated, "I envisioned dispatching even 1 U.S. supper to you. The protein from my midday repast could sustain you for 7 days. I dwell in heaven as you endure torment." With the dawn of 1945, as news of the Reich's downfall filtered into the enclosures, the disparity turned otherworldly. Detainees received word of the Ardennes campaign's collapse over New Year's feasts. Accounts of German towns lacking provisions, warmth, or hydration arrived while they dined in cozy dining areas. U.S. publications displayed photos of famished German non-combatants, youngsters afflicted with rickets and distended from hunger. The captives spotted resemblances to their relatives in those shots. Oberwriter Hans Fischer noted, "The publication depicts German youths consuming weed-based stew. I savored pork for morning sustenance. My young Klaus grazes on grass as I devour flesh." Upon the Reich's capitulation on May 8, 1945, German POWs in U.S. facilities confronted a profound paradox. Victory's close signaled their impending return to a devastated, famished homeland. Several resisted departure. The enclosures had evolved into sanctuaries against the deprivation looming back home. The U.S. forces launched initiatives to instruct POWs in agricultural output and storage practices applicable to Germany's restoration. Captives absorbed lessons on preserving via jars, cultivation strategies, dietary essentials, and rationing systems. Major General Louis Lurch, directing POW affairs, remarked, "These individuals have witnessed U.S. plenty. They grasp its feasibility. They'll head back to the fatherland armed with insights to avert famine." As send-home efforts loomed in the closing months of 1945 and opening of 1946, German POWs grappled with a harsh contradiction. They needed to gear up for departing opulence toward deprivation. Facility leaders implemented schemes to slowly diminish allotments, aiding readjustment to shortage. Detainees received guidance on scavenging, crafting broth from scant supplies, and safeguarding edibles, sans cooling units. The very sights that showcased excess now imparted endurance amid want. Dr. Wilhelm Hoffmann, the top German health official, recorded, "We need to reaccustom our troops to hunger. Their digestive capacities have grown. Reverting to homeland portions might prove fatal for certain ones." Prior to send-offs, every site organized parting banquets. The hosts supplied culminating spreads, outshining typical festive fare. During Camp Shelby's goodbye event in February 1946, the bill of fare featured prawn starters, premium beef cuts, shellfish extremities, spud with dairy and tangy cream, green stalks, romaine with dressing, cocoa dessert, frozen treat, vintage, and brew. Soldiers shed visible tears, not from delight, but from the grim realization they might forego such indulgences forever. Headman Friedrich Müller penned, "Our concluding U.S. repast outdid any Reich holiday I recall. Come dawn, we revert to root mash and fiber loaves. America dispatched us away, sated, yet shattered. The voyage back unveiled the totality of the fatherland's ruin." As railcars entered German borders, the men clustered at pains, surveying a barren wasteland of debris. Locals at halts appeared emaciated, pleading for edibles the homecomers lacked. At Frankfurt Depot, repatriates observed German folk scuffling for refuse from coalition troop carriages. Youths with bloated hunger torsos implored for sweets that weren't there. Unofficia Paul Weiber documented, "We re-entered Inferno. My spouse deemed me a fraud. I appeared overly robust, overly nourished. My offspring, arrived in my absence, suffers rickets due to poor feeding. The disgrace overwhelms." In spite of the shock of homecoming, ex-POWs proved vital to the nation's revival. They carried expertise in U.S. farming approaches, edible safeguarding, and sustenance science. They comprehended prosperity's attainability, having embodied it. Numerous ex-captives rose as pioneers in German agrarian overhaul. They deployed automation, synthetic soil enhancers, and evidence-based tillage acquired stateside. They recognized renewal's viability, having observed a civilization that realized it. Hans Miller, ex-Oberreiter, took up consultancy in farming for Bavaria. He composed, "In Yankee acres, we gained what fatherland academies omitted, that inquiry and self-rule yield plenty." Upon the 1947 unveiling of the Marshall Plan, prior POWs grasped its import more keenly than average citizens. They had tasted Yankee munificence and excess. They realized the U.S. could finance Europe's resurgence, given the effortless excess signaling boundless reserves, the nourishment assistance that commenced. The journey back to Germany felt strangely reminiscent to the ex-POWs. The widespread plenty they had encountered while imprisoned now permeated the whole country. Ex-Sergeant Wilhelm Schmidt noted, "The Americans are nourishing us once more, but now as liberated individuals. They deliver wheat, powdered milk, tinned products, the very same provisions we consumed behind bars. Research from the 1950s revealed that ex-POWs from U.S. facilities displayed markedly distinct perspectives compared to those held by other nations. These individuals were far more inclined to endorse democratic principles, embrace economic partnerships, and hold favorable opinions of the United States. The culinary encounters proved pivotal. These soldiers had sampled opulence and yearned for it in their homeland. They realized that wealth arose not through domination, but via manufacturing, not via ethnic dominance, but through advancements in farming techniques. In 1955, Dr. Hans Richter examined former POWs and determined that the U.S. camps unintentionally served as academies of democracy. With satisfied appetites, captives uncovered truths their doctrine had obscured, that democratic and capitalist systems could generate prosperity which fascism merely dangled as a prospect. During the 1960s and 1970s, as these veterans grew older, numerous shared their stories. Their accounts repeatedly highlighted nutrition as the deepest mental influence of their imprisonment. Ex-Lieutenant Werner Hoffman stated, "The Americans conquered us with sustenance prior to their troops' advance. Each serving illustrated their strength. We yielded to plenty well before capitulating to Eisenhower." Ex-Corporal Kurt Meller penned, "I gained greater insight into America from its cuisine than from its literature. The nonchalant excess revealed surplus abundance. The diversity conveyed options." In the 1980s, elderly German POWs started revisiting the U.S. for gatherings. They toured the sites of their detention, repurposed for different purposes. They connected with ex-guards and nearby residents who recalled their presence. During a 1985 event at Camp Shelby, ex-POW Hans Weber offered German beer to mingle with U.S. vets. He raised a glass, saying, "You sustained us amid enmity. You revealed plenty while we endured shortage. We headed home with filled stomachs and fresh aspirations." U.S. Guard veteran Robert Johnson replied, "We simply gave you what we consumed daily. No extravagance. That's the essence of America. Ordinary fare that appears wondrous to those familiar with deprivation." The figures underscore America's farming prowess against German deprivation. German civilian allotments from 1943 to 1945, bread at 2,000 Drahte per week, meat at 250 Gran weekly if obtainable, fats at 100 Gran weekly, sugar at 200 Gran monthly, milk unavailable for adults, eggs 1 per week if possible, daily energy intake 200 to 700 calories, German POW allotments in U.S. camps, bread without limit, meat 350 Gran each day, fats including butter daily, sugar freely available in beverages and sweets, milk 1 quart per day, eggs daily with morning meal, daily energy intake 3,500 to 4,000 calories. The disparity extended beyond mere volume to character. German provisions often included ersatz alternatives, deteriorated items, and sawdust additives. U.S. provisions were fresh, diverse, and superior even to Germany's peacetime norms. After the war, mental health analysis indicated that German POWs in American facilities underwent mental realignment via intake. The routine of plenitude compelled them to reassess core convictions regarding U.S. culture, German preeminence, and the essence of a nation's vigor. Dr. Friedrich Braun's 1950 investigation wrapped up. The POWs endured an unchosen shift in ideology via nourishment. Each bite refuted Nazi rhetoric. The soldiers weren't indoctrinated, but satiated into change, altered by indulgence instead of force. This shift hit especially hard since it stemmed from direct involvement rather than abstract ideas. The POWs hadn't merely learned of U.S. plenty, they partook in it. They hadn't just been told of farming prowess, they benefited from its yield. Ex-POWs infused post-war Germany with elements of American dining habits. They imported formulas from mess facilities, preparation methods from rural housewives, and crucially, the conviction that plenty lay within reach. The initial German supermarkets of the 1950s drew inspiration from U.S. outlets recounted by returning POWs. Ideas like selecting from stocked shelves, chilled compartments, and preserved meals all stemmed from captivity amid American provisions. Even the later popularity of U.S. quick-service eateries in Germany owed something to ex-POWs recalling burgers, franks, and frozen treats from their time held. They had savored effortless plenty and sought it for their nation. At the final large assembly of German POWs in 1995, marking 50 years since the conflict's close, 89-year-old Otto Müller gave the main speech. "We arrived in America as champions of the superior breed, assured of our edge, positive of triumph. We departed as humbled figures who had dined at freedom's banquet. The Americans provided for us not out of malice, flaunting what we lacked, but from open-handedness, distributing their surplus freely. Every meal served as each satisfying meal served as a profound lesson. We discovered that the true power of America resided not in its military forces, but in its farming prowess, not in its arsenal, but in its grain fields, not in its principles, but in its frozen treats. Indeed, those indulgent ice creams, an extravagant treat that U.S. captives enjoyed every day, even as kids back in Germany went without. We came back to our homeland armed with insights far more precious than any tactical intelligence. We understood that plenty could exist because we had partaken in it. We grasped how democracy functioned because we had savored its rewards. We realized that harmony trumped conflict because we had sampled each. To the U.S. folks who nourished us, you subdued us through compassion. You overcame us with pastries. You won us over with Java and dairy. Those of us who showed up as foes departed as promoters of your plenty. The provisions you offered during our captivity laid the groundwork for our bond as partners. Gratitude for sustaining us in our need, for extending grace when retribution seemed fitting, for demonstrating that true might comes from offering, not seizing. We ingested the essence of democracy, and it reshaped us entirely. The crowd, comprising U.S. ex-servicemen, German counterparts, and their loved ones, rose in applause, bound together by recollections of how adversaries turned into companions over shared meals, how animosity melted away in the warmth of welcome, how the conflict concluded not in reprisal, but in nourishment. The tale of German prisoners of war and the lavish U.S. provisions represents one of the most striking instances in history of accidental mental conquest. Without any scheme or messaging, America subdued its opponents merely by ensuring they were well fed. The 425,000 German POWs who cycled through U.S. facilities, with 1,983 at the maximum, underwent a shared metamorphosis via what they ate. They entered as soldiers of the Nazi regime and emerged as observers of plentiful governance. They arrived convinced of German dominance and left aware of American affluence. They stepped in as opponents and walked out as prospective partners. The meals provided in those American camps went beyond mere survival. They altered perspectives. Each ample serving chipped away at Nazi doctrines. Each sweet treat shattered falsehoods. Each cup of milk shattered the notion of U.S. frailty. The captives were vanquished not through scarcity but through surplus, not via harshness but via benevolence. Ultimately, America's most potent tool wasn't the nuclear device, but the classic pie. Not the armored vehicle, but the candy treat. Not the flying fortress, but the grilled cut of meat. The German POWs were overcome by indulgence, bested by sweets, subdued by produce. They had anticipated encountering a frail, fractured country teetering on ruin. Instead, they encountered a farming giant capable of nourishing its rivals more effectively than Germany could its citizens. They beheld the machinery of freedom, yet, crucially, they relished its bounty. The shift was total and enduring. These individuals went back to Germany not merely as vanquished rivals, but as devotees of wealth, champions of excess, envoys of feasibility. They had glimpsed tomorrow, and it was delectable. Their narrative serves as a reminder that the most significant triumphs often occur not amid combat zones, but in dining areas, not via ruin, but via munificence, not by shattering forms, but by sating appetites. The German POWs, stunned to be consuming protein, produce, and confections in U.S. camps, came to see that democracy's core vigor lay not in demolition, but in generation, not in retribution, but in supplying needs. They entered famished and departed satisfied, not only physically, but brimming with fresh visions for their country's potential. Within their change sprouted the origins of the Transatlantic Pact, the post-war recovery initiative, and the thriving, serene Germany rising from devastation. The soldiers who had once paraded under the Third Reich came home as heralds of farming, seers of wealth, and testifiers to a culture's ability to convert adversaries into allies via the bold, transformative gesture of distributing its riches. They had sampled the American way, and it forever altered them.